This is Portage County Live on News Talk 92.1 FM, 1010 AM, WPCN. Stevens Point, Scott Krueger with you. And as promised, with us is former Portage County Sheriff Dan Hintz. Dan, pull that microphone a little bit closer to you.
Okay.
All right. Good morning.
Good morning,
Nice
Scotty.
to see you.
It's a great pleasure to be here.
Dan walked into the studio. Now, just, to give everybody that might not know the proper perspective, I started in Stevens Point Radio as a part-timer in, I believe, August of 1977 here, in fact, in this very studio, and then full-time in, I believe, April of 1978. And so you and I have known each other since that time, basically.
Yes, we have. It's been a long time.
Yeah. So Dan walked into the studio, and I'm not sure if he knew I was still here or not, or who was going to be talking to him today. Scott, what are you doing? I go, Dan, what are you doing? So it's great to have you here. And, I've had a chance. I'll be honest. I did not read the whole book. I just don't have time to do that on a short notice like I had. But with that said, I have looked it over. Really interesting read. We're going to go through parts of that here today. We've got Dan with us for 2 straight hours, and in a little bit, we're going to give you a chance to call in and talk to Dan, and maybe you remember an incident or two, just want to say hi, whatever the case. We're going to give you a chance to talk to Dan. We're going to talk about his book. And I guess the first thing is, Dan, what possessed you to write a book at your ripe young age of whatever it is, and we won't go there?
Well, my original aspiration was to leave a legacy for the kids and grandkids. Something to talk about as generations move on, giving them some idea as to where their parents came from, their grandparents, their great-grandparents that moved here from Poland and Germany. Kids today have no idea, unless we sit down and talk to them, which is very difficult because there's so much into the electronics and such. They have no idea as to where things started and how tough things were at one time.
Yeah, and I guess it's all relative because when they get to be our age, they're going to be talking to their kids much. You kids don't have it near as tough as I. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, your
Yes.
parents were telling
right,
you, and
right.
now you're telling your kids. It always, and that's okay. That's part of the system, part of the game, if you will. And times were totally different. We both know that. And when you were a kid growing up on a farm right here in central Wisconsin, you did a little bit of work before going to school, and then when you got home from school.
Exactly. It was a daily routine. Up very early in the morning, start off with breakfast, milk the cows, put them out to pasture if the weather is feasible, and then come in, prepare, and head off to school. It was about a 1.25 mile walk cross country. We used to cut through woods and marshes and such to get to school, and that was a one-room schoolhouse. We had all 8 grades in one room, usually between 28 and 32 students total. And each class was called to the front to a table with the teacher on a rotating basis to conduct classes.
I always thought that would be an interesting dynamic to talk to folks, and I've got you here, and we're going to talk just a moment or two. I don't want to make this all about your days in a one-day school, but going back to that, my grandmother on my mother's side was a school teacher in a one-room school in Fond du Lac County. And I unfortunately wasn't smart enough while my grandma was alive to talk to her about that. I wasn't smart enough. The dynamic of having all those kids, different ages, there had to be obviously some negatives to that teaching situation, but I would imagine there was some true positives in that kind of a situation as well.
Yeah, really. I think it was a totally different era. Teacher was God at that time.
Oh yeah.
When it came to discipline and such, If the teacher had to discipline you at school, whether it was pulling out the belt, if it was really a serious matter, you didn't dare to carry that home to your parents, because to the parents, that teacher was number one, and your punishment was much greater when you got home if they found out that you got in trouble there.
Yeah, you thought you got it bad at school. If they found out you got punished at school, you were getting it worse at home, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, that was a different day. We all know that, and teachers have their hands full today, as they did back then. We truly admire all of our teachers in our society today. It is I won't say it's a thankless job. They know they get thanked every day by kids and what have you, but it certainly is a challenging position. So you grew up on a farm with a mom at home, I'm assuming. Well, you were on a farm, but in those days, Mom usually was at home and Dad went off to work. In your case, your dad was on his property and went off to work, and Mom ran the household.
Yes, exactly. We had 12 kids in the family, totally, So it was a big brood for them to raise and my mother to look after. My mother came down with tuberculosis when I was about 3.5 years old, and she went to treatment. River Pines was a sanatorium for tuberculosis isolation at that time. She was there for 3 years. And my oldest sister, Pat, dropped out of school from the 8th grade to raise the children. So it was quite a handful for her as well, and a lonely experience for my dad. So it was a very different life.
Now, in your book, you do detail all the family stuff, and I'm not going to ask you to go through all of it. You lost a young brother, I believe. Was that correct, when you were kids? Or was it?
No, when I was a child, it was my sister Junie.
Yes. Junie, I'm sorry. So you lost a sister. Most of your other siblings still alive?
No, about half.
About half of the 12?
Yes. I had my older sister died at the age of 8 from a ruptured appendix. She was hospitalized for about a week before she passed. The very first in the family was Phyllis. She died at three days old, right after childbirth. That was the very first offspring of my parents. Later, I had a sister that died at age 44 with lupus, and she later had a massive heart attack. She had 5 daughters. I had a brother that died at age 51 of cancer. I had a sister, my youngest sister, died at age 34 after being involved in a critical auto crash at the age of 18, and she was in a vegetative state until she passed away.
Wow. So you've had a tough family life in some ways.
Yes, it has been.
So, but is Pat still with you?
Oh, yes. My oldest sister,
Yeah.
very, very much alive. She lives near Galloway. She's just into Shawano County. In fact, they're the second farm into Shawano County. If you go northeast from Portage, she turns 82 years old this year, and she had 11 kids. And her and I used to sit and talk about large families and such. And she said, Dan, my perception of getting old is loneliness. She said, sure. I don't ever want to be alone. And she raised a wonderful family, many of them police officers. Her son Paul just retired a couple of years ago from the Portage County Sheriff's Department. Her son Joe was chief of police eventually in Marshfield. He retired from that position. She has a son Sam in the Wausau area with the police department. She has a son John down in Cedarburg near Milwaukee. So it's quite a brood of law enforcement personnel that came out of that family.
So were you the first of your family to decide law enforcement was a good vocation?
Yes, it was. I was
so
very
in
first.
some ways, your sister's boys kind of following Uncle Dan.
Very much so. When I was a deputy, I used to swing into Portage County to have coffee in the morning if it was quiet, and with my sister, and the boys would come around, and they were little tots, and asking me about the equipment I wore and such, and that's a big gun, I said, that's why we keep a lock on it. You see, that's a strap. And, we used to discuss things, and they'd ask me how I like law enforcement and, asking me about interesting experiences I had and such. And eventually, I was very proud of that fact that it felt like it was a following, if you will.
Well, yeah, I think I can understand what you're saying there. And yet, and people need to realize, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, Dan, but while you talk to your nephews in this case, or your sister, or family members, or even friends, a lot of the business you can't tell them. It's private, personal stuff. We never know everything. Maybe some of that we didn't know comes out in your book.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. As a matter of fact, the first inclination I had as to my aspirations in life was when I was about 10 years old. My parents used to come into Stevens Point to do the grocery shopping about once a month, just for the staples, the 50-pound bag of flour, 25 pounds of sugar, that sort of thing. And they would usually pick one or two of us that were allowed to go along. So it was quite an experience. Anyway, we were coming into Stevens Point one day, and there was a billboard. I think it was near the airport, and the billboard face had changed. I looked up at it, and I see this huge police officer leaning down to a little boy, handing him a popsicle. And I thought that was the greatest thing in the world. I think that left a lasting impression with me because, the thought at that time particularly was, you stay away from a police officer. You're in trouble if you're involved, So it was something kind of instilled in us to fear. And here I saw this transformation of law enforcement and the attitude toward the helpless, really, really hit home with me. And that stuck with me for a heck of a long time.
Yeah, that's a great first impression. And so many, maybe you would or would not agree with me on this, Dan, but we're talking to former Portage County Sheriff Dan Hintz. He's got a new book out, In Pursuit of Justice, Memoirs of a Small Town Sheriff. We're going to delve deep into this book in a moment, but so often I think the image is, or the thought process is, don't get too close to the police, to law enforcement. They're there to, watch over me. You really, as I recall, law enforcement is the old saying, to protect and to serve. And really, the men and women in law enforcement kind of, I don't know if I'm saying this right, they would prefer to be your friend and not your, watchdog or what have you.
Exactly. The the people in the county or the people in the city are the law enforcement. It's that shield and that uniform on that individual that represents that segment of society that we as young people or uninformed learn to fear and keep away from. I think some of the programs that go way back, in Portage County in particular, this county has a lot to be proud of. The programs such as the baseball card situation, funded by the state and federal government back when I was a deputy, later chief of police, and then sheriff, of course, was a way to break that barrier between children and law enforcement, to start it early, if you will. Then came the positions of safety officer that would work with the schools and actually start with programs like Patch the Pony, singing with kids in the classroom. These are kindergarten, first and second graders, and they really ate that up. And, they want to, it was a method in which you tried to draw the kids closer to that uniform. Not the old fear tactic, So, to me, it's a building situation through life of a law enforcement officer. The closer you become to 98% of the public, which is, what makes us. You got that 2% of bad people out there, okay? if you will, and the majority has to be on your side. Otherwise, you're not going to get anywhere. Whether it's investigating a crime or looking for information as to which way to turn to a given suspect in an area, if you got good communication with the public, you know who to go to get information. You know that they'll come forward. You know, it's no longer a situation where it feels like there's a barrier between law enforcement.
Yeah, I
and
guess if you want to have a safe community, you have to be a part of the community. I'm talking to the public, not the law enforcement men and women. But doesn't mean you have to be a tattletale or what have you. But if you know something is not right in your neighborhood, let somebody know.
Exactly. And that's how neighborhood watch programs came about. And they weren't a policing society. It was a situation where people looked out for one another. You know, if you saw a strange car parked in front of your neighbor's house at 1 o'clock in the morning because you woke up to get a glass of water, you pay attention to it and report, incidents of concern. So, that communication is so darn important. It's I can't say it loudly enough. The programs and such that law enforcement today are implementing are just fantastic. It's going to reap great rewards when it comes to law enforcement.
We are talking with former Portage County Sheriff Dan Hintz, who has a new book out, In Pursuit of Justice, Memoirs of a Small Town Sheriff. There are so many great little stories in this book. If you get a chance, by all means, pick it up. And Dan, you have some book signings coming up. When and where, if you can remember off the top of your head?
I've got them memorized.
All right.
Okay, beginning tomorrow, which is Friday, we'll be at the Plover Library on Roosevelt Drive from 3:30 p.m. to 8 o'clock. Although the local librarian told me that they will furnish us with a key because they expect it to go longer. So I really hope that that's the truth. I want to meet and greet again. These are my people. I feel this as a grand homecoming for us. We're really looking forward to it. Then on Saturday, we'll be meeting with the Historical Society at the Temple on Water Street, and we very much look forward to that as well. I want to talk about the history of this thing, and people here in Portage County are all part of that history. They grew up as I did. They were here during the very vast experiences that I had as a deputy sheriff, and then starting a police department in Plover in 1975, running for sheriff in 1978, and serving 4 terms in this great county. So I'm really looking forward to that. On Sunday, we go out to Galloway to Gin and Tonics. That's the only watering hole in Galloway from what I understand. But we wanted to reach out to the rural areas as well. We'll be out there from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. on Sunday, followed by a visit back to Stevens Point at the Stevens Point Library on Monday. We'll be there from 4 o'clock to 7:30. And on Tuesday, we'll be at the Moose Club, and that was put together very quickly just a few days ago because people there were very interested in getting it together, and they have various organizations like the Marine Corps League, the AMVETS and such, that would like a visit. So we absolutely will be there at 6 p.m. We'll be there till about 9 o'clock. The following day, which is Wednesday, we'll be out at Shantytown. And that's the closest to my roots. My dad's farm was located about 3/4 of a mile the way the crow flies to the north. And we'll be out there from 4 p.m. to 9 p.m., giving the farmers an opportunity to get the cows milked and still make it out there to visit with us. We'll have plenty of books at every signing. For the people that already purchased the book, I'd like them to bring it in and have it personalized. I'd like to autograph them for them and really make it a community affair. We close with a signing in Rosholt at the library on Friday from 4 to 8 p.m. And there again, they told me to lock the doors when I leave. That's where I went to high school, by the way, in the metropolis. But last but not least, I'm going to visit the Polish Legion of American Veterans, Polonia Post 185, that I belong to since inception. I'm a life member out there, so we'll be meeting out at Harvey's in Ellis. They have it's one of the largest groups in Wisconsin in the PLAV. So many friends that I haven't seen in a long time, many friends that I want to shake hands with and hug and such. So we'll be serving coffee and cookies to take the boredom away, if you will. My wife has put together some displays that she's bringing to each site. She'll lay out old mementos and such, throughout the career that we had collected and kept.
You're going to be busy.
Yes, sir. We're very much looking forward to that.
No rest for the wicked, right?
No, sir. As a matter of fact, I thanked Rick Muzzy this morning for giving me this opportunity to come here, and you, Scott, as well. I mean, memories go way back. But as a result of this, I get an invitation to air on Monday on a Wausau radio station.
Excellent.
Very short segment. So, and that's because of the competitiveness of Portage County, I'm sure. They want to get their word in as well. So we're looking forward to that. I had an interview a couple of weeks ago with Wisconsin Public Radio. I was on for an hour, and we could have used 3. I always did talk a lot. And my oldest sister will attest to the fact that when I was a little boy, chatter, and she said, when I was first elected sheriff, she said, you finally found a job where you can talk all you want and people can't stop you. But I love to reminisce. There are so many good things that have happened in my life, and time goes so fast. We've been gone from Wisconsin for 15 years. We left in 2000, moved to Florida, because all 3 of our children moved to Florida. They all live in the St. Pete area, and we've had 4 grandchildren since, and they range in age from 8 to 14. So we spend a lot of time with them. We're about 25 miles apart, but close enough to keep it comfortable, and keep Granny and Papa available to babysit and to assist little work projects around the houses and such, so it's nice to see that the situation goes on. We're very, very proud of it. We're proud to be here.
Well, we're happy to have you here. Former Portage County Sheriff Dan Hintz is our guest. And I guess at this time I'll open the phone lines. Anybody that might want to call in, say hi. If you have the book in hand, you've perhaps read it, you have some questions, you want to go over a case or two that chances are Dan will remember every case he was on. But if you have something you'd like to talk to Dan about, feel free to call us, 342-1010. Keeping my fingers crossed that our phone system is working better than it has been over the last few days. But I think we have a remedy should it not be working properly. We can still get your call on the air. If you want to give us a call, please feel free at 342-1010. We'll get you on the air and talk to former Portage County Sheriff Dan Hintz. It is currently 7:38 and 57 degrees. So you got into law enforcement. What year, Dan?
1967, actually, in Ozaukee County. I worked as a deputy there part-time for a couple of years before I applied for the position opening here in Portage County in 1969.
All right. And then came, obviously, here, and you started in Plover, right?
No. I lived in Whiting at that time, and I started with the Portage County Sheriff's Department.
See, and I guess I had that confused. So you were a deputy here.
Yes.
With Portage County Sheriff's Department, obviously eventually becoming sheriff here.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about, as a deputy, some of the cool things, and I call it cool, I don't know. Police work, if you go home and you say, that was cool, or if you go, oh my goodness, that was, because you see things that most of us do not ever want to see. And yet I think there are some things you men and women see that you just love about the job.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things was the different situations that occur every day. There are no 2 days alike. There are no 2 calls alike. It's from bar fights to auto accidents to complaints about cattle breaking fences to God knows what, house fires, lightning strikes. There are so many things that come to mind. I think the mix of things and the interesting life as a law enforcement officer is, like I said, you never have an identical situation. It changes from day to day. And I talk about one story in the book very briefly where when I was sheriff, I had a gentleman come in to wanted to file a complaint against the Stevens Point Police Department. And I asked him what the problem was, and he said, well, shouldn't they arrest me for trying to break a window? And I couldn't understand just where he was coming from. And then things started to come together as to, it was cold. It was the latter part of December. Person had no place to live. Was wondering why he got a written citation rather than being jailed. So it was rather funny. Whenever I think about it, I have to chuckle. Because I informed the police department to take him up to the county jail. We'll hold him for the weekend and make a decision on Monday. So it's the 3 hots in a cot that I refer to in the book. One of the more hilarious things that have occurred.
Yeah, and one that probably today, and I'll throw the probably in there, you could never get away with.
No.
Law enforcement has changed over the years, no question about it.
Correct. It has, but you've got some homeless people out there, and this is exactly the picture he drew for me in terms of his complaint. He wouldn't come out and say it. He wanted to file a charge against the police department for not doing their job. And you're the sheriff. You were elected. So you should be arresting these people. And I thought it was kind of hilarious, but I knew what he was getting at, and he was a very good inmate to begin with. We brought him in, and he mopped floors, and he helped the matrons serve the meals and everything. But he was there. He was safe. He was warm, and he wasn't hungry.
Yeah, well, in some ways, I think that goes on a little bit more than we like to admit. Not by somebody trying to break a window, but there are some folks that are in jail maybe just because it's better than what they had going on outside.
Yes.
Yeah, so
I believe so.
They do some things that they otherwise wouldn't do. Some good people end up behind bars. And leading into then, I'm sure you've had situations where good people make mistakes, maybe some that you even knew. And I'm not asking you to name names, although in your book you have a few names in there, I'll be honest, from some old cases. Did you run into cases, Dan, where you knew the people, whether it be anything from breaking a window to, heaven forbid, car accidents or what have you, knowing the people make it a tougher job for law enforcement people?
Always. That always comes into view. Although, you have to concentrate on impartiality. When it comes to the crime, that's the situation. When it comes to the individual being a close friend or related, it makes it rather difficult, very uncomfortable to deal with the situation like that. And I've had a few.
Yeah. Well, if you're in, you're going to run into it, right? I mean, eventually,
absolutely.
If you're in any length of time, it's inevitable something's going to happen. Hopefully nothing too severe, tragic, but you're going to have some kind of thing happen, whether the house starts on fire.
Sure. And
you have to go and help a buddy, a neighbor, or a family member, recover from a home fire or whatever. That's taxing. Is it tough on health? The job itself, I mean?
It can. It depends on how the individual is able to adjust. Mentally, it can do things to a person, particularly if you deal with rather violent situations and you try to relate that, especially case in point, a child being abused. or a wife being beaten. To put it in perspective, you're dealing with a situation that you compare that to your own life, your wife, your children, and the reaction, I think, is more human than it is factual law enforcement. You try to remedy the situation rather than to make arrests and such. People do stupid things. People do bad things. Doesn't make them all bad people,
It's got to be tough to keep the emotional side out at times.
Oh, yes, very much so. And, oftentimes you carry it home with you. You don't want to leave things at the office for a law enforcement officer. That's a joke, It's not a job, it's a way of life. And you certainly carry some of those thoughts and pictures in your mind when you go home. Dealing with a very aggravated auto accident where body parts are strewn and such. Then to go home to have dinner after the fact, very difficult to consume meat. You see the situation and you relive it as you're falling asleep. So it's not just a job.
Hopefully this works now. Good morning. We do have a caller. You are on the air with former Portage County Sheriff Dan Hintz. Go ahead with your question.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for the opportunity. I'm relatively new to the area. That means 10 years plus, as you know. And I live out in Roshold, and I hear about the Posse Comitatus, and I was wondering, because I got some of my friends and neighbors that mention that stuff once in a while. I'm just kind of wondering what that was all about.
All right.
Yeah, the Posse Comitatus was a group that was very much against the federal government, taxes. They believed in self-governing. It was one which was believed to be by the FBI anyway as a terrorist group. They were quite forceful at times, very, very much by themselves when it came to public interaction and such.
Do you have more you'd like to hear from Dan?
Well, as I recall, somebody told me it kind of came to a head over the building of a pond or something out here, that they didn't like what the DNR was doing or something.
Out by Roshold?
Yeah.
There was one situation where a farmer had built a dam on a trout stream to hold the water to irrigate his crops. Mm-hmm. And because it was a trout stream, the DNR got involved. The man owned a lot of property on both sides of the stream and insisted that he, in fact, owned the waters. And that situation came very close to people being shot. There were posse members that were called out there by this farmer who guarded the property. And it was just into Marathon County, as a matter of fact. And Louis Gianoli was sheriff at that time. So he brought some deputies out to assist the DNR in taking evidence by court order to confiscate the pump and the tractor, the power takeoff system on the tractor turned the pump. And in that situation, there were shots fired at the tractor. There was nobody hurt, but people scattered very quickly. Because these are high-powered rifles, and they weren't in the situation to deal with a case like that, and the fact that it was relatively new. These folks seem to prey on farmers that are facing foreclosure with a bank, and they hated banks. They felt that they were evil. The same as the federal government. They used to post signs that federal agents would be shot if they crossed the line. Survivors would be prosecuted and persecuted, as I indicated in the book. So it was not a laughing matter. And I experienced a couple of those when I was sheriff, as a matter of fact, in which when the final order came down on a foreclosure, I took the papers out to the farm myself. And I walked past riflemen in the driveway. I left the squad car at the road because I felt relatively safe in that they preach the Constitution and insist that the Constitution is the reason that they're there, that they're afforded that opportunity to come armed and to form a militia and such. And the sheriff and the governor are the only two officers of the Constitution. So I felt that if anyone should deal with them, it should be the sheriff, because he is an officer of the Constitution, thereby quelling any belief that they're there lawfully by the Constitution. I felt that the sheriff would be the last person they'd want to shoot.
Gutsy.
So I appreciate your clarifying that, because like I said, I've heard rumors of it, and you pretty much just quoted exactly what I've heard anecdotally around here. So thanks very much.
You're very welcome. And by the way, the history of that goes back. We removed the Posse Comitatus from Tigerton Dells in 1984. In 1981, there was a shootout at Wounded Knee, South Dakota, if you recall.
Sure.
And there were federal agents and a U.S. Marshal shot. The individual that led their militia, if you will, escaped to Arkansas, was tracked down there. He was eventually shot there by U.S. Marshals, but he took two more and a sheriff with him.
So they weren't messing around.
And no, exactly. And we just thank the Lord that we had such good communications with the federal agencies that tried to keep track of the swelling of this organization and the dangers, and they insisted that this was in fact a terrorist group.
Well, that's very interesting. So thanks for your book.
All right.
You're welcome.
Thanks for your call this morning. Once again, if you would like, you can call and talk to former Portage County Sheriff Dan Hintz on the air with us until 9 o'clock this morning. We're going to stay an extra hour with Dan. Feel free to give us a call, 342-1010, 342-1010, and we'll get you on the air with Dan Hintz, and you can ask any questions that you might have. So the posse, and while you guys were talking back and forth, I was trying to remember, because that was, just after kind of I got started in this business, and I was in our news department at the time, and I remembered it was out towards Tigerton,
yes.
Tigerton Dells, that they were kind of headquartered, or at least in our area. Were there other groups of posse around the state, Dan, or was this just centralized right here in our area?
Well, according to the FBI at that time, it was estimated that there were 60,000 members throughout the country, and they were situated in different groups in different states. But the significance of Tigerton Dells was that in fact was a township that they created by Constitution. And it was against all laws and principles. They created the township. Donnie Maniszewski owned the property, and he owned the tavern and dance hall out there, if you will, at Tigerton Dells, and they named it the Tigerton Dells Constitutional Township.
Okay. I remember, now that you said Maniszewski, I remember that name. I wouldn't have been able to pull that out, but he was kind of the leader or what have you?
He was very very involved in the military preparedness, if you will. They had a rifle range out there. He helped train the people and uniform them, and this was quite an operation. It was about 160 acres that was enclosed in chain link fence, and the rifle range probably covered 20 acres, immediately adjacent to the Embarrass River. Jim Wickstrom was the head of the posse at that time.
Yeah, okay.
Yes,
I remember that name now too, as you bring back memories to me. Again, former Portage County Sheriff Dan Hintz joining us. He has a new book out, In Pursuit of Justice, Memoirs of a Small Town Sheriff. Dan's going to have book signings starting tomorrow, and we will go over those book signings again maybe a couple of times before you leave us here, just so people are aware. maybe I'll get you to write them down, and we can periodically mention them on the air over the next few days as well, Dan. But with all that said, we go from the Posse Comitatus, and one thing, I talked to a few guys yesterday. I have a little golf league that I am a part of, and we were talking bank robberies, and I want to get into that in a moment, but it was all in a time frame where prior to me getting into this business, and actually prior to me coming to Stevens Point to go to college, we had our own little Woodstock here in central Wisconsin, right? Out by Iola. I'm trying to picture where this took place, the so-called Iola Rock Fest.
Yes, it was near 161 in the town of New Hope, the northeast corner of Portage County.
Yep. So kind of along 161 there, roughly, on that corridor.
Uh-huh.
And you, I think, in the book said there were estimates of maybe even 50,000 people showing up for this event?
That's correct. And we were prepared for 4,000 to 5,000. We never expected that to flourish like it did. I mean, traffic was backed up for miles. People were coming in to buy their tickets. We had checkpoints set up. We did as much as we could with the manpower we had. Because it's so close to the Waupaca County line, they assisted somewhat as well. But we were very limited in the coverage. And, working at one of the checkpoints on the first day of the Rockfest, I encountered a VW bus pulling up with a dead deer on top. And I asked the individual, the driver, as to what he was going to do with the deer. And we were checking for weapons and drugs, primarily, that were being smuggled in, if you will. And the individual said that he found it on the side of the road. It was hit by a car. And I asked him what he intended to do with it. And he said, "We're going to eat it this weekend." So it was very interesting, to say the least. But things started to get out of hand after the second day. I mean, this influx of traffic was just incredible. And it swelled to estimates of 50,000. They had a small tent set up for first aid, which they were told that they had to do. And that thing was full all the time and overflowing with overdoses and such, because we didn't have sufficient manpower to police the interior, other than trying to keep it safe.
To the best of your recollection, about how many, and at that time, correct me if I'm wrong, you only had men on the active deputy force, or was there a female on your force at that time? There were women working at the Portage County Sheriff's Department, but not deputies, correct?
No, that's correct.
So about how much manpower, if you will, did you have at that time?
In total, at that time, about 28.
Yeah, and you were trying to run a 50,000 person Rockfest and patrol the rest of the county. The numbers don't match.
And patrol the county and run the county jail and dispatch. The deputies had to rotate through the system. You usually had a 3-man crew out there patrolling the highways. The fourth would operate the jail and dispatch the calls. So it was very sparse, and that's probably one of the reasons. If you look at a group picture back then, the average deputy was 6'3", 235. And they were usually in pretty darn good shape, physically, because they had to handle situations without a backup. Your backup was 45 minutes away in many cases, So you get called to bar fights or, major altercations or severe accidents. You were out there alone. And very, very often you got help from the public. And that goes back to the communication factor again, I had gone into bar fights, believe it or not. Another deputy in particular, Bob Check, used to enjoy the same. He was very well liked in the county. You'd walk into a situation where 5 or 6 people were tearing the place apart, and the patrons in the tavern would ask, "Hey, Bobby, you need some help?" He says, "You darn right." So, they came to aid, if you will, and I had many situations like that where people stepped up and and took punches themselves to help quell the situation and to try to protect me as well.
That's got to be one of the messy things for any deputy in your day as sheriff or nowadays, is people getting involved in physical confrontations, and then you're the person trying to, end the situation. And some folks think, well, you have a gun. Well, the minute you pull that gun, now the options are limited. Am I wrong on that?
No, it's very true, very true. Nothing was different back then except that, generally speaking, in bar fights, it was fists and a few broken teeth and maybe a broken arm or whatever, and that was the end of it. Today, my gosh, the gun comes out and in retaliation, and it's kind of an embarrassing situation for the person involved in many cases because he's amongst friends.
Yeah.
And to be taken down and embarrassed in front of his friends is kind of bad and awkward for him, so usually they'll put up a fight,
On a standard night of patrolling, how busy is an officer?
It really depends on the time of the year. When the county is blowing in with snow and it's almost tax time, there isn't a great deal, or wasn't a great deal, of traffic around the taverns and such. As a matter of fact, you could patrol at wee hours of the morning and not see a car on the road for 2 or 3 hours. In the summertime, it's just overwhelming. It's just totally opposite. So, there are times when a deputy runs from one situation to another. He might respond to a family disturbance, and from there to a bar fight. Followed by a head-on collision out on Highway 66 or Highway 10, Highway 51. And usually in the county, when the crashes occurred, they were generally pretty serious, and that's why we carried boxes of Kotex in the trunk of the car, because the lacerations weren't small enough to be covered by a Band-Aid. They were usually pretty serious.
We are talking with former Portage County Sheriff Dan Hintz about his new book, In Pursuit of Justice, Memoirs of a Small Town Sheriff. And if you feel the urge, and we really encourage you, give Dan a call right now, 342-1010, and we will get you on the air. You can ask any questions that you may want of Dan. I want to go back, and now you were sheriff from what year to what year?
1979, January of 79 to 1987.
Okay. And I cannot remember, and I tried to, you're supposed to be able to find everything on the internet, and I can't find anything.
Okay.
I remember, and this may not have happened during your tenure, I remember a bank robbery, one in Kellner, Kellner is kind of split between Portage and Wood County, if I remember correct.
Yes.
The bank was in Portage County, which is like at the farthest reaches of your jurisdiction. And then there was a bank robbery at the M&I branch on 54, which I think was at 54 and F.
Yes.
Do you remember, was that in your time as sheriff? And if so, what do you remember about those two?
Well, the brain gets foggy after a while. The brain matter starts to dry up, so the memory bank isn't the greatest. I do recall that it was a fantastic investigation. In one situation, we had so much assistance as soon as the alarm signal went out from the adjacent counties. It was just incredible. As a matter of fact, the first squad car to get to the bank was from another county. We had fantastic working relationships around us. I mean, all the sheriffs around us were Bob Bodette in Wood County, Louis Gianoli in Marathon County, Bill Mork in Waupaca. These people would do anything for me and for us, and we for them. Consequently, at the end of the investigation, we had a prime suspect who had escaped to Riverton, Wyoming, if you will. And as it turned out, a bank president called me one day and he said, I understand you guys are going out to get him. The local authorities there had picked him up and held him. And he went through the extradition situation and was ready to be picked up. And this banker asked me if he could ride along with the deputies. I said, this is kind of outrageous. What do you mean? He said, well, the fellow had bought a truck, and he made one payment on it, and he has it, and it's in Riverton. I want to bring the truck back. So I said, okay. He said, in exchange, I'll pay 50% of the expenses. I said, all right, that's fine. So the deputies, accompanied by this banker, drove out to Riverton, Wyoming, picked up the prisoner, and the banker was going to drive the truck back. Unfortunately, the transmission was out on the truck, so it had to be repaired and serviced. So the banker rode back with the prisoner in the back seat, and he paid 50% of the cost with nothing to show for it.
Now, that was the Kellner robbery?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
See, and my memory was so bad, Dan, I didn't remember that we ever had found the suspect. Roughly how long, and again, I understand over time you might forget, how long did it take to pinpoint this suspect?
Probably 3 months or so.
Okay.
Yeah.
It wasn't a bang bang and you had him.
No.
Okay.
No.
That's good. At least for my memory, it's good. But you got the guy, and
yes.
Was he then convicted?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Uh-huh.
So that one was solved. I guess I didn't remember it being solved.
Uh-huh.
The bank robbery at M&I on 54 was on a holiday weekend, correct?
I believe it was, if my memory serves me properly.
And what happened in that? Did we ever find anybody?
No.
And now I talked to the branch manager at that time yesterday at golf. And I can't remember what he told me, which holiday weekend. That's where I got the holiday weekend from. I'm going to say July 4th weekend.
I believe it was the 4th of July.
And he told me, and I'm not going to give you his name just because I could tell you off the air, but I don't know that he wants me mentioning his name on the air here today. But he thought, kind of funny, he's not sure that the robbers got anything because they blew the safe open, but in essence, they may have blown up all the money at the same time.
Yeah, that was suspected, yes, that they walked away with nothing. Just the explosion, and in the process, the money may have been destroyed and burnt in the process.
We never got a conviction on that one. Do you find, going back again from your days, that the smaller, more rural type banks were set up not to fail by any stretch? They were in a tough position because of being able to get to them with law enforcement. Was there any thought by law enforcement at that time that, gee, I wish maybe we didn't have these smaller banks around the county in this case?
Oh, sure. They're very isolated, and they make an excellent target for an individual, not having to worry about 1,000 eyes looking at them, breathing down their necks, if you will. They get out in the country, they're out there by themselves, there's nobody around type of thing. But it was highly suspected that it may have been the same individual in that bank as well, but it was never proven that was the case.
So they were somewhat close in time frame?
They weren't that far apart. No.
That's the way I recalled it too. So it's possible the fellow that you picked up out in Wyoming had robbed Kellner and then tried to do the same at M&I, and we're speculating here. We don't know.
That's what we suspected.
Okay,
Yes.
all right. Well, with that information, that clears something up for me. I was going, first I'm going, I remember bank robberies, and then talking to people, I don't remember that, and I'm like, maybe I'm just dreaming. something, which is definitely possible.
Yeah.
But at least I'm happy to know that I wasn't quite that far off regarding those two incidents.
Oftentimes I thought about how embarrassing it had to be for the individual and how dejecting after blowing the safe and everything and getting nothing, not even a decent fountain pen situation,
Yeah. And that bank kind of closed down a short while. I don't want to say immediately, but that branch didn't stay open all that much longer, did it?
No, it didn't.
So, at any rate, it is 8:10, and if you'd like to talk to Dan, give us a call at 342-1010, 342-1010. We're going to take a real quick break because I do have to run some commercials. We will be back with more with former Portage County Sheriff Dan Hintz. This is Portage County Live, an extended version on News Talk 92.1 FM, 1010 AM WPCN in Stevens Point.
Hi, this is Scott Glinsky, President with Skyward. Skyward would like to remind you to continue reading daily with your children to prevent what is known as the summer learning slide. Research has shown that students of all ages and reading abilities lose important reading skills if they neglect to read over the summer months while school is not in session. You can prevent the summer learning slide by encouraging them to read for just 15 to 20 minutes daily for primary age students and 30 minutes or more for older students. Put a book of interest in your child's hand, attend your local library for summer reading programs, and take the time to read together. Your involvement with your child's reading during the summer months will lead to a better academic start when school begins in the fall. Nothing is more important to your child's education and future than reading, so pick up that book today. This message is brought to you by Skyward, connecting parents and education, and Muzzy Broadcasting.
ABC News. I'm Karen Chase. 11 commercial flights were hit by laser beams on approach to Newark Liberty Airport in New Jersey in what's becoming an epidemic. ABC's David Curley tells us it's extremely dangerous.
Last night, and in many of these cases, the first cockpit that is hit, the pilots will report, and at least the pilots that are following know that they might get hit by a light, but there's really nothing you can do. There's no way they can pull down the shades. They can't really put on any glasses. They need their eyesight to put the plane on the ground.
The laser pointer could face 5 years in prison. Consumer Reports is now issuing a warning to parents to avoid using brightly colored detergent pods because they look like candy to kids and have led to a rash of accidental poisonings. In a floor-length Versace gown, Caitlyn Jenner got a standing ovation as she accepted the Arthur Ashe Courage Award at the ESPYs and called for tolerance and acceptance.
Trans people deserve something vital. They deserve your respect.
This is ABC News.
I'm Steve Sidkowski, a former Wall Street insider. I'm holding a book that will show you investing strategies which could help you earn the kind of money you've always dreamed about. And right now, I'm giving this book away for free. So who needs to read it? If you're in the middle of your career and worry you'll never have enough money to retire, you need to read this book. If you're already retired and your income isn't enough, you need to read this book. And if you don't want to be selling burgers at 80, you need to read this free book. It includes the strategy I use to make a 72% profit on a trade where the stock only moved 12%. You'll need at least $1 million to ever fully retire. If you're behind on that goal, you really need to read Trade Like the Pros. And you can for free by calling 1-800-920-4786. Skeptical that it will deliver results? It's a free book, so what do you have to lose? Find out how at 1-800-920-4786. 1-800-920-4786.
It's a common belief that all pets hate going to the vet. But have you ever stopped to imagine what your furry friend is really thinking?
Oh boy, my master's home. It's time to play, time to fetch, time to run around and get dirty. Oh, the car. I love cars.
We're here, boy. Community Animal Hospital on Michigan Avenue, Stevens Point.
Yes, I love this place. So many new people, friends to meet. Dr. Tom, Dr. Dawn, Dr. Megan. There's so many friendly new faces. Oh, and the new Dr. Balin, who works with all my more exotic friends like Barry and Steve. Oh, Community Animal Hospital is so awesome.
If only we humans love going to see our doctors so much. Community Animal Hospital is Stevens Point's full-service veterinarian with convenient hours, the friendliest staff, and 4 veterinarians, including one with a special interest in exotics. Be a part of the community at Community Animal Hospital, Michigan Avenue, Stevens Point. Community Animal Hospital.
Create the look you'll love to come home to.
Our family room needs help. Tired furniture, drab window coverings, faded colors, but I didn't know where to start. I heard about Stangy's in Wapaka, and after spending time with a Stangy's designer, I know I made the right choice. You see, we connected. She understands me. Now we're working on a color scheme, space planning, furniture styles, and I've got to tell you, I'm excited about the possibilities.
Hi, I'm Liz Stangy. Our designers are ready to turn the spark of your ideas into breathtaking reality. Let's get together and talk about your ideas for your home. Make an appointment for free in-store design assistance or visit stangys.com and let the adventure begin.
Create the look you'll love to come home to at Stangy's.
You are going to love us.
A good Thursday morning, 8:15, 59 degrees, only going up to about 69, or at least the last time I checked the weather forecast. Not a warm day today, but the rest of the week and for about the next 9 days, we're going to be into the 80s, which is probably like wintertime down in Clearwater, Florida, for former Portage County Sheriff Dan Hintz and his wife and family that live down in the Clearwater, St. Pete area, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we're actually we're 7 miles north of Clearwater, a little town called Dunedin, and that's a Scottish town, sister city to Stirling, Scotland.
Okay. So you're having a good time in retirement, but you're not retired. You're now doing real estate.
Yes, actually, I'm like you. You know, I can't just sit and do nothing, you know, and it gets me out of the house for 6 hours a day. It's a small operation, very localized, very limited, but it keeps me off the streets, and I don't chase cars anymore.
Well, and that's a good thing. Speaking of which, we are talking with former Portage County Sheriff Dan Hintz. He has a new book, In Pursuit of Justice. If you'd like to talk to Dan, just say hi. If you have questions about life in the time of Dan's tenure here as Portage County Sheriff, please give us a call at 342-1010. Happy to get you on the air with Dan, and you can talk to him about some things that you recall from back in the 80s, basically, when Dan was sheriff here in Portage County. You talked about chasing cars, and one part of your book I found very interesting. And Dan, by the way, this book, I think it's a really good read if you're any kind of a longtime resident of Portage County, and especially if you lived through that era. You're going to want to pick up this book because there are going to be things you remember, only maybe you don't remember them quite the way they really happened. Dan has it in there. One thing that I never knew about was a night where you had to drive through a snowstorm to, in essence, save a man's life who was going to get a kidney transplant down in Madison, but you had to get the patient there. In today's world, they helicopter body parts around, but in the old days, sorry to say old days, but we lived through them, right. You had to get the patient to the, in this case, kidney. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, actually, I remember it very vividly. I was working the jail and dispatch that night. I got a call from St. Michael's Hospital, and it was run by the Sisters Order of St. Joseph's at that time. And they indicated that there were a set of kidneys available at University Hospital in Madison. And I had a 2-hour limit to pick up an individual who was no longer responding to kidney dialysis. He was at St. Michael's, and they were readying him, and asked if we could quickly escort that person there. Well, I called Bill Kavadik, who was captain at that time, because the sheriff was on vacation, and it was late night. And I told Bill of the situation. He said, I'll be right there, and I thought he was going to take the run. Well, the elevator opened a few minutes later, and Bill stepped off, sleep in his eyes yet, in a T-shirt, and he said, okay, I'll take the helm. He said, you got the car gassed up? You know, get the car gassed up and go. Okay, so I gassed the car up. I went to St. Mike's, and they said time is of the essence, and some time has passed. We got to get him there quickly. So, being a young deputy, speed was not a factor. As a matter of fact, it was rather enjoyable at times. I strapped the individual in, and in fact, if I recall correctly, he came from the Menominee Indian Reservation. And I strapped the fellow in, and I think there were about 3 words exchanged during the course of this trip to Madison. The snow was drifted along the roads. The road was clear. Okay, Highway 51 was clear. The banks along the road were 10, 12 feet high, and I was cruising. I had the Yelp siren going to keep the deer off the road, and I had no idea how long it would really take me to get to the hospital, but I vowed to myself that I was going to make it in time. So going through around Coloma or so, I saw reflections on the snow, these red lights, and this trooper had been parked in one of the turnarounds that were plowed, and he pulled out after me, and we had no communications with the state or other counties and such. We're a very local radio system. So as he pulled out behind me, I watched in the rearview mirror, and I just watched him disappear. So another one about 10 or 12 miles down the road attempted the same, only he was on the shoulder, and he had the lights flashing before I got to him. And I went around him and just continued. We're moving, 130 miles an hour probably. And I get to Madison. The crew was waiting at the door with a cot. There were about 5 or 6 people, along with the doctor. And I asked to use the telephone as soon as they took the patient in. So I had to call home. So I called Bill, who was on the dispatch. And I said, well, I'm here, Captain. He says, where are you? And I said, I'm at the hospital. And he said, we've got a time limit. You better get your butt going, boy. And I said, I'm here. He says, you're where? And I said, in Madison. And he said a few derogatory words, and he slammed the phone down. And I was thinking, man, I'll be in trouble when I get back. But when he got back, he said, there's only one guy in the county that could have done it faster. That's me. They used to call him Cowboy Bill because he could operate a car at 140 miles an hour. That man could handle a vehicle. You felt safe with him, because he had everything under control.
Maybe you should have gone into short track racing or something. Yeah.
Well, the adrenaline takes over when you get into a situation like that. You're young, in your 20s. This is a situation that you welcome. You don't fear it.
Speaking of which, then, and I'm not asking you to make any comment on today's law enforcement. I'm just going back to your time and your recollections when you were sheriff, and for that matter, when you were an officer, a deputy at that time, as you're getting into law enforcement, like in this case where you were younger and took the gentleman down to Madison. Part of the draw for now men and women getting into law enforcement, is it sometimes the adrenaline rush, if you will, that you can get out in certain situations? Was that any part of the draw for you to get into law enforcement at the first time? I know you talked about the billboard that kind of inspired you, but some people, may or may not think about, I get to drive fast at times. I have a gun on my hip. If you want, it's a powerful position.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I think, things have changed in that the media sources are so on top of situations today so quickly that oftentimes before the job is done, that law enforcement officer is judged, The cameras swoop in. There are so many capabilities, helicopters and such, that get right to the scene and start to report, before the situation is even finished. And that puts law enforcement in a very awkward situation, a very awkward position. You have those isolated situations like South Carolina where the person running away from the officer was shot in the back, and the officer said that the person pulled his taser from his belt. But the situation is still in the courts, naturally. But in an isolated situation like that, you have a rogue cop, plain and simple. I mean, it's somebody that overreacted too quickly, had his emotions involved unquestionably, to do something that horrible, and that kind of because of the media sources, like I said, and reporting capability, people start to draw a conclusion. I mean, law enforcement officers are shooting people in the back. Are you kidding me? That's very isolated, and they're treating that individual as a criminal, just like any other individual. He overstepped his bounds. From my experience, I can never remember a single situation where a deputy or a police officer, if you will, while I worked in Plover, ever overstepped bounds. If anything, sometimes they waited too long to react. In other words, they already saw the knife when they pulled the gun, or they already saw the gun, and that happens in 90% of the situations. An officer doesn't pull that weapon until he sees one. And 98% of police officers are shot in 7 feet or less. It's close encounters. There are like 22%, I believe, from statistics that are shot with their own weapon. So it's a very 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 nerve-wracking situation that the person is put in. He has to react very quickly. He has to make snap decisions. Especially a deputy. A deputy in the county is the sheriff. Out there, he carries the same powers as the sheriff, So he has to make decisions and follow through the same as though the sheriff were out there, and that's the way he's trained, So, in today's situation, you take the Missouri factor. It's going over the edge. That's building that wall between us and them. It's portraying that picture to the people. But all in all, they have to understand that, meeting a person on a street, if you're not in a hurry, you should thank them. Say, "Hi, officer, how are you? I hope you're having a good day. Stay safe." Because they're a reflection of who you are. They really are. They're there in everybody's best interest. They're the first potential target, in cases where a person is locked in a room, he's got a rifle with him, blah, blah, started off with a family dispute or whatever. Now you've got a very critical situation. And, that officer has to put up with a great deal. It's not just the excitement of getting out there and doing it,
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And isn't it ironic that not all the time, but so often, the Scott Krueger who's complaining all the time about, Johnny Law's here, and why is the cop sitting there, and why is he running a speed trap here, and all this, is the first guy to pick up the phone when he needs your help, but you've been complaining about law enforcement all the time, and yet why aren't they here when I need help? Yeah. Isn't that ironic?
Yeah, it is. It is. And every officer has the same heart when it comes to why they're there and what they're going to do. It's always in a betterment of the situation, to either quell something that's getting out of hand, step in front of the gun to take the bullet, if you will. Most of them are willing to do that. That's why they're wearing the badge. That's why today we insist that they wear protection, like a second chance vest, bulletproof vest, which can help. But, the criminal is wising up to the fact that there's no protection to the head, so that's a pretty deadly shot. And, You can look at situations like the officer down in Elm and Pine Grove, a simple traffic stop, and it turns out to be a shootout, and he got the worst of it. The man was pierced from the front, and the bullet exited his back, and he still continued. So it's it becomes a survival factor after it gets that deep. But really, people here, especially in Portage County, should be very proud of what they have. That officer is willing to go to the absolute extreme to save your life. And I pictured, just imagining what heart an individual has. He's out grocery shopping. He's off duty. He sees a man with a gun and a woman pushing their shopping cart. I'm willing to bet you majority of the deputies would jump in front of that bullet to take it. Yeah,
I believe you. We're talking with former Portage County Sheriff Dan Hintz, In Pursuit of Justice, Memoirs of a Small-Town Sheriff. Now, Dan is going to have some book signings coming up. Tomorrow he will be at the Plover Library between 3:30 and 8. Saturday, Dan will be at the Historical Society over on Water Street from 4 to 7 p.m. Sunday out in Galloway from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. at Gin and Tonic. That's a pretty cute name, by the way.
It is.
On Monday at the Stevens Point Library downtown from 4 to 7:30. Tuesday out at the Moose Lodge from 6 until 9. These are all book signings. Wednesday he's going home, so to say, out as close as possible to his hometown farm, his family farm when he was a youngster growing up out in Shantytown at Corky's from 4 until 9. On next week, Friday, he'll be at the new Rosholt Library. I don't know if you've had a chance since you've been back here only a few hours, if I remember.
Right.
Rosholt has a very nice new library right down on Main Street. We were out there, just before they got all of it finished up. It's very nice. From 4 to 8 on next week, Friday. And then Monday, you are going to be with the, how is that said?
Polish Legion of American Veterans.
There you go. Out in Polonia from 6 until
It'll be at Ellis. Actually,
in Ellis, at
yes,
Harvey's.
At Harvey's.
Okay. All right. So plenty of chances to pick up a book, get Dan to sign it, or just stop by and say hi. I know that he would enjoy speaking with you about that, his time here and all the recollections. You can go through so many of them. We highlighted a few things from your book, Dan, but I don't know if I want to call it your favorite because that doesn't sound right for police work, if you will. But are there certain cases that just stick with you, perhaps on a positive side, and then one or two that just to this day you go, darn, we never figured that one out?
Yes, the one that really still haunts me and bothers me is the Janet Rosh murder, if you recall. Now, that's a long time ago.
Yep.
I know that there was a letter received from an individual who stated that he had some information relative to the case. There are people out there that know something about this case. For God's sakes, they need to give the family some closure. It's not going to bring Janet back, but it should clear a conscience on their part. I mean, a murderer is out there and walking free. This situation isn't settled. The family still suffers. They're up in the Merrill area. They deserve it. They need to close the case. In order to close the case, you got to get some closure. You got to get the information to law enforcement. You can do it anonymously. My gosh. You can go to Crime Stoppers, or you can call the Portage County Sheriff's Department, and they guarantee that you will be protected, that you will not be made public and such. So there are ways of doing that. But for God's sakes, whoever is out there, if you're listening, you have any information whatsoever, bring that to the attention of law enforcement.
Yeah. What year was that?
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
That.
Well, that's okay. We don't need a specific.
Okay.
That she was a UWSP student, right?
Yes, correct.
And was basically going to go home for the weekend, as I recall.
Yes.
And obviously never made it.
Right. And the confusing thing is that, her family lived up near Merrill, and, her body was found on Highway 54 in the direction of Green Bay, Waupaca, Green Bay. So that certainly confuses the issue as to why in that direction. But nonetheless, somebody out there has information that hasn't, even if it's a tidbit, a hearsay, pass on of any sort, they need to contact law enforcement and help try to bring some closure to the family. That is the biggest issue.
Are there a case or two where you say this was just the best thing, because maybe the case with getting the gentleman down to Madison to get him a kidney transplant? Maybe you can't pick out a favorite. There had to be more situations. It could have been as simple as passing out candy in a parade or what have you. Cases where you just felt good and the people you were serving, and at least the way I see law enforcement, you serve us, you protect us, you serve us, and we all thank you for that. In that way, do you have some cases, if you want to call them that, that warm your heart?
I've got one that's very close to my heart. It happened when I was chief of police in Plover, and we had our traffic appearances on Monday morning before the judge, and I went in a little early in preparation, and there was a case where the gentleman wanted to state his case to the judge, and it just so happened it was one here in city of Stevens Point. Well, the person told his side of the story. The judge bought it. He felt that it was a good case to throw out. When he passed that judgment, the individual's head fell on the table, and he slipped off his chair and started to discolor. He lurched a few times and stopped moving. A police officer from the city asked if I could assist. And here I was in my sharp uniform. The gentleman was vomiting and such. And I certainly knelt down. I cleaned out his mouth, and I started mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. And we got the individual breathing again and had a pulse when the ambulance got there. They brought the cot off the elevator, took him to the hospital, and there he had a relapse, another attack. They shocked him. They brought him back for just a short period of time, and he passed away. I left the courtroom. I went to the bathroom to clean up some because I had vomit on my uniform. I was kneeling in it and such. I cleaned up. I came back into the courtroom, and the judge got a message from the bailiff that the individual was alive. He was at the hospital. That was at the very onset. And then he got the next message just a few minutes later that the person had passed. So he announced that in a courtroom as well and had a moment of silence. And he thanked me for what I did. That one stays with me because I was able to bring a life back,
Yeah, and
so even if it was for a little while.
You bet. That isn't a daily occurrence, but folks in law enforcement are put in those kind of situations more probably than you'd ever want to be, and thankfully they're all very well trained and are capable of saving lives, and we appreciate that. I wanted to go back. Again, I'm not trying to ask you to make comments about today's law enforcement. We all know, you know as well as anybody or better, that it's a whole different ball game, especially with the media today and the way every little thing is covered. Some will say, that's really good, now we're finally finding out. Some will say, it's no different than, before. We're just hounding or covering too much. But I recall back in your day, I was at that time with Gary Westcott as our news director. One of my jobs was doing the morning police beat, and I started my day down, in fact, at the sheriff's office and the city police department, which was then in the basement of the county city building, and the sheriff's department was over in the annex, the old, I think it was a car dealership garage turned into the sheriff's department. And we had a key to get into the sheriff's department at that time. So that was in my possession. And I hope he doesn't mind me throwing his name out. But Gene Kemeter was the guy coming in from the Stevens Point Journal. And it was almost every day we'd come in and we'd kind of get there maybe around shift change or something, because there was always one or two and sometimes more of the deputies sitting in the break room, which is where we were able to access all of the reports filed by the officers on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. And you talk about cooperation and now the extensive media coverage that you had mentioned, making law enforcement maybe a little tougher these days. There were things, and I'm going to be honest, I'm not speaking for Gene, but there were things in there we knew that we just, at that time, we weren't supposed to say.
Correct.
We got the gist of the story to the public, but we didn't say that Scott Krueger is the guy that did this or Dan Hintz is the guy that did this. I think, and people may not agree with me, I think we did our job as reporters without interfering with law enforcement at that time and without further embarrassment to the public.
Yes, the communication was just fantastic. We relied on one another. There were many times that we called you and asked you to
absolutely
to report on certain matters that we needed some public input, some information from the public and such. That has really changed. And this goes back to when I'd rotate through the jail and dispatch, and Jim Shue would come in at 2:30 or 3 o'clock in the morning and checking the blotter as to what activities we had and what was newsworthy. He had a responsibility to report to the people the daily activity. Yet he knew where to draw the line because we had a good understanding. We had a good understanding with you, Scott. You didn't go out and blurb everything that you read. You would ask if that name should be revealed. Well, no, the investigation is going. Today things happen so fast, and it's so critical to get the news out there that oftentimes just a suspect is convicted before he's even tried, by public opinion. And that's not a good thing. I think the relationship that we had back then was second to none. As a matter of fact, during the course of the preparation for the Posse Comitatus, I took 2 news people in my car for a ride, and I'm not going to name names because they are your close friends and such, but we could trust them that much. They knew something was going on. I took them out there to show them where the headquarters of the posse was, and gave them a basic exterior tour, if you will, with the car, and brought them back. And I knew they weren't going to release anything. I didn't even have to, threaten them breaking their necks if this information got out.
Yeah.
But we had a really, really good understanding, and as a result of that, there was no interference with the planning of that situation. You see, you asked me about one that really, really stands out in my mind as to a really good feeling. It was just that, the Posse Comitatus and the removal. I was elected Northeast Area Mutual Aid Director by the sheriffs and chiefs of police of our region. And so I was very much involved in coordinating the situation involving several counties. And we had a terrific experience with Tony Earl, who was governor at that time. He had to sanction the reimbursement to the counties, which actually replaced the need for National Guard in a large critical situation. Because, it was our position that who better to deal with a civil situation, a localized situation, than the sheriffs and the sheriff's departments and police departments that are there. So that's how this situation came to be before my time. That plan was written. During the planning stages, which took several months, we did a great deal of surveillance. I had a couple of deputies go trout fishing in the Embarrass River to get a close look at the layout of the rifle range and such. And they were confronted by a rifleman and basically told, you don't belong here. You better get out. No, we're here legally. We're trout fishing. We got in at the bridge at the road, and this is a navigable stream, and we can fish here. He says, well, you're coming up on the rifle range, and there are stray bullets. He's kind of sending them a message.
Uh-huh.
Well, they completed their surveillance, gave me a full report on it, which was really helpful. Really helpful. That was the closest eyeball we had to it. The FBI was trying to track some of these people, the higher-ups, and they were from all over the country. And there was a leak in their communication, if you will, that the FBI picked up on. And there was going to be a large gathering meeting at Tigerton Dells and at the compound. So they provided aerial surveillance just to watch to see who's coming into that meeting, where they're coming from, and how serious a matter this could be. And they found, vehicles licensed to the state of Washington, Idaho, Missouri, from all over the country. And they said it was an extremely large gathering, and we were to beware that the FBI was very much afraid that the information leaked, that they are now preparing for war, and that we should stand ready. And they were absolutely certain there had to be a leak. That's why this situation came to be, this major meeting on a Sunday. So we kept that in mind, but it was only a few weeks after that I actually set up a meeting with some of the posse leaders while Jim Wickstrom was in jail in Milwaukee, that I was actually able to get into the compound and talk to the folks, and that's where they tried to show their strength and force by one in particular slamming his .45 down on a coffee table and telling me how deep we were going to wade in blood, and another asking me or challenging me as to, do you really think you have the manpower? Do you really think you have the firepower to come in here and take us out? You see what we got going? These people are trained, These are trained warriors. They're not just flu-flus. And so, it was kind of hairy in a sense that I'm in one of their dwellings, at 10 o'clock at night, and it was raining to beat heck that day. But to me, I felt real secure in that I left my gun in the car. I came in and I was wearing a suit at the time, or a sport jacket, and I opened it to show them I wasn't armed. And I sat there and we talked. And I stayed as calm as I could, trying to negotiate a peaceful way of getting them to go along with the violations of law that that's coming down on them, and I was assured that it's not going to happen, and I said, I hope that we can avoid confrontation because you got women and kids here, for God's sakes, and they're going to be in the midst of it. So you're telling me that we're going to have a shootout here in the compound, and you're going to shoot to the death? That's exactly what we're saying. So be ready. You better have your stuff together if you're coming in here to get us. Well, this meeting went for about 35 minutes, and I wasn't stupid. I had the Sheriff Knope from Shawano County had three cars with deputies in each with shotguns and buckshot. We set a time limit of 45 minutes. If I wasn't out of the compound, they were coming in to get me. So I felt reassured with that. I knew that there were people that were going to bail me out if I ran into a critical situation. But nonetheless, I left there thinking it's very possible that we'll get another meeting and things will carry on. But I assured them, whether it's forcefully or otherwise, they will move. And that's when conversations got very serious, But gave them no idea that we plan to come, that tomorrow watch for us or anything like that,
Sure.
I left. I reported back to the governor. I assured him that we did everything possible, and he assured me that any assistance that we could that we might need from any of the state divisions, that they're all at our disposal. He was totally satisfied that we've done everything we could, and he prayed that there wouldn't be too much bloodshed. So as it came down, and the way it turned out, that it all came down in one day. Every home was removed. Every occupant was out. The place was landscaped at the close of the day by a landscaping company that seeded it, and it looks like a golf course today. So, that to me was probably one of the greatest accomplishments that I was part of.
So they just picked up and moved out, kind of?
No, we moved them out. We picked them up, moved them out, and we had a group of officers that did screening at the gate as we brought the people out, so that criminals, with outstanding warrants and such, were kept. The others were afforded protection down the road to wherever they had to go. Probably, several went to the Tigerton Dells Dance Hall and Tavern. Some went to the restaurant in the corner to use phones to call someone to pick them up, because we had removed everything from the households and the houses themselves and moved them to property that the township owned that we could store the homes on. So it was it started at 4:30 in the morning and it was clean house at 6 p.m. So it's in the book. It's a very interesting situation.
Pretty hairy situation at times. Not to make too much light, but I was sitting here thinking, while you're telling the story about you being in there in your suit, and I was going, well, I'm thinking Portage County Sheriff's deputies, at least their slacks are brown, just because I would have been I would have been having some trouble.
Well, I think if you found the shorts I wore that day, you might find racing stripes on them.
Oh my goodness!
I'm here to tell you that there were times that fear came into play, but it wasn't a factor. I always felt that everybody's going to die. You're in a situation where you can die for something good, and that was deeply embedded in my heart. I didn't want to die, certainly, but if it were a situation where I could save someone else, I was prepared to do it. And the way this whole thing came down, I sent a 10-page report to the governor, and immediately after the situation, the removal. And he, in turn, called me a couple days later, and he asked me if I could do him a favor. He said he'll reimburse all these costs, but he asked if I could put together a 2-hour training curriculum for the other regions. So we did that. I put that together, and I went to Waukesha and Green Bay and such throughout the state, La Crosse, and the local law enforcement heads and people were there to with whom we shared all the information relative to this. It wasn't a sister model to what might occur that they'd have to deal with in their county, but it was one that the governor sanctioned as the perfect end to a very dangerous situation. So I received an accommodation from him after that and remained friends.
Well, that's pretty cool, and I think a perfect way to kind of segue into a closing here, if we can, as we're almost out of time, to get that entire thing accomplished without a shot being fired, that has to be a crowning achievement.
Oh, absolutely. You know, the way the whole thing came down when we cut the chain on the fenced gate, if you will, cut the power to the and communications. Their cables were cut, telephone and such, so that reinforcement couldn't be called in, because that's another thought that came to mind. What if they're able to get these people with high-powered rifles from the exterior? Now we're in the middle of it. Now you're meat in the sandwich, you know?
Yeah.
So the deputies forming the SRT, the Special Response Teams, in fact, the first house that was hit, it was a Portage County team that was there, along with a Shawano County deputy that had the paperwork ordering the people out of the property, you know, to vacate. And so it was an eviction, if you will. Well, at the very first house, it was a double-wide mobile home, and there was a screen porch built in a half circle out front with a concrete floor. And when the deputy knocked on the door, he was to hand the paper to the first person that came to the door. So they're duly served, so the rest of the team can go in to protect and isolate. And the response team was outside. The man came out. Rather than answering the door, he came to that screen enclosure, and he put his nose right to the screen and wondered who's out there. And I knew he was one of the military leaders. Well, my deputy reached right through the screen. He grabbed him by the neck and pulled him outside through that screen wall and handcuffed him, and it was fantastic. The door then opened, and the remainder of the team and the Shawano County deputy went in. And I'll tell you how critical that decision was. When we went inside the house, in that screened enclosure was a concrete floor with 7 guns facing to the exterior, 2 on bipods and 1 with a belt of ammunition. So you can imagine what could have happened, what a massacre that could have been. Well, everything was timed so that each house was hit at approximately the same time, with a separate team and a deputy from Shawano County, thereby making it a totally unquestionable legal approach, because Shawano County was still in charge. It was their laws that were violated, so their officer had to serve the papers, but he needed the protection and the beef to be able to accomplish it. So it was, I believe, 34 minutes that every house was empty of people.
Wow.
And they were marched out to the front gate and screened there. And, there were, I believe, 3 that were held on outstanding warrants, and the rest of them were released. So now, because, so many people in the community surrounding this were so fearful of these people because they were antagonistic. A person with a Jungle Bunny suit on walks into a restaurant and starts staring people down, and he's got a machete hanging on one side, carrying a .45 on the other. I mean, these people were, just totally eclipsed by this, And so, we had to make sure that these women and kids and stuff that are coming out of there are protected till they can get to shelter or a telephone or whatever, So we had, that's why I took so many in terms of law enforcement, to give them safe leave, if you will, after the screening was done and such, and transportation of those that were wanted on warrants. And then the moving companies came in, and everything worked out so beautifully. It was just incredible, just incredible.
Well, that couldn't have gone any better, and we really want to say thank you so much for taking some time here this morning. And book signings again begin tomorrow at the Plover Library from 3:30 until 8. This Saturday, the Historical Society building on Water Street from 4 to 7. This Sunday, out in Galloway at Gin and Tonics from 11 until 4. And then Monday at the Stevens Point Library, 4 to 7:30. And the rest of the week, next week, I'll run down again tomorrow. Dan, thank you so much for your time. Excellent book. Hopefully lots of people will pick it up. I think you're going to enjoy the read. You heard a lot of the Posse Comitatus stuff here, but there's so much more in this book. I think our area residents are going to enjoy it. Thanks for coming all the way up from Florida to join us here and have a good, however long you're staying, a couple of weeks maybe?
Yeah, we're staying a total of 13 days, and it's basically the signing tour and to talk to the people, shake some hands, give some hugs. But I want to thank you, Scotty, for a job well done. And I really appreciate the opportunity I had here at WPCN to be able to talk to the people in Portage County. This is where my heart is, and we're treating this as a royal homecoming, really looking forward to it. Very excited.
Well, I'm sorry, go right ahead.
I'm sorry. John Spiller, my co-author, who is just an exceptional human being, is back in Florida. We decided that Wisconsin would be mine and only mine when it came to book signings and presentation and such, So my wife and I came alone, and John is back in Florida, probably listening if he can get you on the airwaves.
Well, he can on the internet,
but
that's for sure.
He's a terrific partner and very knowledgeable. So,
well, again, thank you so much. Have a great time here in Wisconsin. Enjoy our cool weather. And then enjoy your wonderful life with your family down near Clearwater, Florida.
Well, we're really looking forward to the change in temperature in particular. And, speaking to one of the greatest voices on the radio, Scott Krueger, a very dear and old friend of mine. I really appreciate it, Scott. I want to thank you.
Well, I appreciate it, Dan. And again, great to see you. Looking forward to having everybody come out to see you around the county here over the next, almost 13 days. So
yes,
thanks again.
Two of the places, Plover and Roshold, in fact, are giving us a key to the library because they really believe that it's going to go beyond 8 o'clock and we're to lock it up when we're finished.
That sounds good.
We're looking forward to a dandy crowd. We'll have coffee and cookies to take away the boredom. There will be a lot of memorabilia that people can experience while they're there that they can look over. Like I said, this history is shared with them as well because they lived through that period. They recall a lot of these things, and it's something they can buy as gifts to hand down to their grandchildren, close friends and such, So I just yesterday, as a matter of fact, signed one where a lady bought it for her brother, who's a retired sheriff from the state of New York. And I signed that from one sheriff to another. And he's very much looking forward to reading. He's probably reading the book today.
Well, sounds good. And he probably experienced some of those same type of things. Absolutely. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
All right.
I appreciate it.
That is former Portage County Sheriff Dan Hintz joining us here on an extended version of Portage County Live. It is 9:03. We are at 62 degrees. This is News Talk 92.1 FM, 1010 AM WPCN in Stevens Point.